Coming up on today's episode of PSN, friend of the show, former Paralympian and co-chef de mission, Karolina Wisniewska stops by. It's 1 year until Milano Cortina. How are the athletes doing? How are they preparing for that final push to the Paralympics? We'll find out.
Welcome to Parasport Nation with Alex Smyth and Nathan Clement.
Welcome into Parasport Nation. I'm your host, Alex Smyth, and as always, I am joined by co-host and Paralympian Nathan Clement. Nathan, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, Alex. I'm really excited to share this interview today with Karolina. As friend of the show, she is such an energetic, exciting person, and it's going to be really amazing just to hear her insights on what it's like to be a winter athlete going into a games.
Yeah, it's always funny with Karolina because I always find myself learning something new, or the conversation goes in a direction I don't expect it to, but I know we are in for a fun ride. So why don't we dive into it? Let's welcome in Karolina Wisniewska to the show. Karolina, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us once again. Second time on the show. You're quickly becoming one of our recurring favorites. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
As we kind of look ahead towards Milano Cortina, it's just about a year out. You were a Winter Paralympic athlete. What does the importance of that year before a games mean for you as an athlete, as you were kind of preparing and training? Because I know the timelines seem to be quite shorter. That is like, this is the critical time if you are a winter athlete.
I don't know if it's that much different from summer to winter. I'm looking at Nathan, maybe he can speak to summer, but I was a 3-time Paralympian on the winter side, so I can certainly speak to the year before. Each time, it felt like no time at all. Like it was like, okay, this is it. And also you have to remember that my sport was alpine skiing. So in skiing, Nordic, snowboard, most of the winter sports, the ones that happen outside, you don't have access to your venue year round, right? So we chased the snow, and our season is short. And if there's not enough snow, races get canceled. And like, there were always these extra variables. So this season, the winter athletes will be going to Milano Cortina and that whole area to do test events. So it's a year in advance of the actual Paralympic Games, and they have a World Cup race there that is, you know, as close as you're going to get to the real deal in 2026. It's a really exciting time. Depending on who you are as an athlete, it can potentially be very stressful. For me, I found it great. I was just hyper focused and really dialed in with, like, it takes the full 4 years from the previous games to the current games, in my opinion, to really get it. There's a whole, and I see Nathan nodding, there's a whole sequence of things that happen. And so in that last season, that's what I'd call it, ski season before the games, you're just dialing things in, like you're really perfecting things, ideally.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Like, even on the summer side of things, like, you don't want to overvaluate or really lose your mind and how much you have to do when you just need to break it down into small little aspects. But historically, I know with Para-Alpine, they like to select their teams late and close to the games dates. What's that experience like being an athlete when you're about a couple months out and there's still that uncertainty of if you're going to be going to the Winter Games?
There was never any uncertainty for me. I always, because it's actually based on your world ranking and on your points. So, you know, I never had any stress about it because I knew I would get named to the team. It would be, it's not meant to sound arrogant. It's just a fact. It's based on you're standing across all the disciplines, how your points. So basically how it works is, in sports like skiing, so unlike cycling or swimming, for instance, where it's the same distance all the time, obviously skiing, it's different every day. You have a new course set every day. So how do you compare kind of apples to oranges? And it's all about ranking. So let's say I'm one of the top 10 female racers in the world, which is pretty much always the case. So the top 10 of us, and more, we're all racing against each other. And based on the time differentials, they figure out your points. It's a whole thing. But essentially, I never had any stress about whether I would get named to the team. The process is you get named to the national team. So that's one thing. And you have to meet the Alpine Canada criteria. But and you also have to meet the Canadian Paralympic Committee criteria, which are often far less stringent. Alpine Canada has more stringent criteria. But yeah, I was never stressed about that. I'm sure, though, in fairness, I know there were teammates of mine and friends of mine who were. And it's not ideal. It's really not ideal because they ended up thinking so much about that. And every time they went to a World Cup or to a race or to a training camp, they were constantly thinking, okay, well, I need to, place at least here or be this far off the leader and I need to get this many points. And it can be very stressful. And I'm really grateful that I was a very consistent racer, very, very consistent, and consistently in the top 3, top 5. So it wasn't an issue for me. But as I said, I did have teammates and friends from other countries as well. And each country has a little bit of a different system. So you never know. But it's interesting to me that for sure in Canada, to make the Paralympic quota was super easy. Anybody could do it, practically. Sorry, but it's true. It was oh, and then some people were oh, I made the Paralympic, and it's no, that's meaningless. You have to make the Alpine Canada quota.
That's the more important one. It's you could
Yes.
represent, you could compete at the Paralympics, but you also have to represent a country to compete at the Paralympics.
And each sport, of course, has the
Yeah.
knowledge of their sport, right? And that's what you have to respect.
I'm curious for you, Karolina, being a year out, as you mentioned, athletes are going for the test events now. If there is a kind of a poor outing, a poor performance at this point, is there enough time for athletes to get themselves back into position that they could qualify and make a run at the Paralympics? Or is the timeline that if you don't do well at these world championships, that may cause a ripple effect that prevents you from making the Paralympics in a year?
I definitely, okay, let's pretend it was me. And I had my test event coming up in February or March. But I had been consistent and all my points were good. And let's say I crashed and I look like I crashed. See, look at all my injuries. I crashed. I'm super injured. It would make no difference because for someone like me in my position, because my consistency and my points on the World Cup tour would show that I have what it takes. And, that was a blip, it was a bad week or a bad day or whatever. And it would make no difference in terms of assuming my injuries were not severe and, minor or whatever. However, it's not like in those sports, like in athletics or swimming where you're there's a time and you're trying to beat that time. You can't just show up and I remember there was a woman who was saying before the 2010 games in Vancouver, she was saying all over the media that she was going to compete. And I was well, no, you've never even been to a NORAM race, let alone a World Cup race. She had no idea how the system worked. And again, I'm talking about my sport and it's very specific, but a lot of Nordic works in a similar way, snowboard works in a similar way, based on how the sports are. So all this to say, if you were in a position where you were hopeful, it's too late for you. If you haven't, they're not just going to take you to the test event and be oh, you're a hopeful, come with us. No, that's not how it works. So they already have a good sense of the depth and who's there. It's not like in those other sports where you can just show up and be I'm going to compete in this race and I'm going to go to the Paralympics. It doesn't work that way. It's a much longer process.
For yourself, when you were an athlete, because you mentioned earlier that in skiing you chase the snow, especially in the summer months, what would those summer months look like for you? Would you be going to South America, or would you be going to the Southern Hemisphere to get your training in, or would you be doing a lot of different strength-based kind of work?
Yeah, so for us, pretty much every single day of the year is planned out. That's maybe sounding a little bit too specific, but certainly every week or every month, you had chunks, and Nathan, I'm sure you know this, so this is probably not interesting for you, But essentially, if I had to, in a general way, depending on what the snow situation is around the world, you would have the month of May off, like to play and do the things you like to do, but nothing dangerous because you can't injure yourself. So you're allowed to do whatever. Other than that, every single day of your year is planned. So June and July, you're doing like a really high volume in the gym, like really bulking up your body. August, you're getting more specific. You're doing things that are more bursts and anaerobic stuff. September, we'd go to Chile, we'd be on snow, and whenever you're on snow, you're still doing stuff in the gym the same day. So you're on snow in the morning and then you're in the gym in the afternoon. So like you're in the gym 6 days a week, all the time, the whole year round, other than in race period. So then in September, we're in Chile. In October, we would go to Europe and ski on glaciers. And this is the schedule that everybody who's an alpine skier follows. Able-bodied, para, everybody's on the same circuit. So they're in Chile or New Zealand, and then they go to Europe, Switzerland, Austria for the glaciers. So you're not necessarily at the same resort, but you're essentially following this. So October, you're on the glaciers. And then for Canadians, in November, we'll go to Western Canada, which is where I'm from originally. So I get to go home to Calgary, to the Calgary area, usually to Panorama or somewhere. So that's November. December, we start racing. So it's so funny to me living in Montreal now, because we're like, oh, ski season's starting. I'm like, what are you talking about ski season starting? It's race season, people. And so we would usually start racing, usually in Europe about mid-December, racing all of January, racing all of February. Like it's a lot. I loved it. I love being on the road. I love racing. I love winning. I mean, I say it like in the present tense, like I'm still doing it, but I love traveling. I loved skiing. I loved all of it. And I had teammates and people who get homesick and stuff. I'm like, I never got homesick. I just was so happy to be on the road. I loved it. I want to, if I could, I'd keep doing it. It's so great.
Well, one thing you are still doing, Karolina, is being highly connected with the media. You were the co-chef de mission for the last cycle. I'm curious for you, what has been the biggest changes in the evolution from when you were competing as an athlete to being a co-chef de mission when it comes to the media presence, the awareness, the attitudes around the Paralympics, around following and learning more about the para athletes?
Yeah, it's so secretly, I really want to be in Cortina and see how it is on the winter side. So if you have any pull, that's my mission for 2026. I want to be there in some capacity in 2026 on the ground for Winter Games to see, because the last Winter Games that I saw live were Sochi 2014. My last games as an athlete were 2010 in Vancouver. For sure, it has changed. I mean, Nathan was there in Paris. I was going to say this past summer, 2024. It was incredible. Paris everyone anticipated that they would do such a great job, and I kept saying that they would, but I thought, oh gosh, what if they don't? But they did. It was incredible on every level, in terms of the organization, in terms of the venues, in terms of the crowds, in terms of the support of the French fans and other fans, in terms of the volunteers, and in terms of the media exposures, particularly in France. I will say, I feel that Canada has a long way to come, has a long way to go in that area. My perfect example is I competed in 2010, a home games in Vancouver. The Alpine team specifically were favored, and we delivered to win a ton of medals, and we did. 2 years later, I'd already retired. It was the Summer Games in London, 2012, and before Paris, those were widely considered to be the best Summer Games ever. And I arrive, and Team GB athletes, there are wraps of them on buildings in downtown London. They become household names. They become sports commentators on national television, on Channel 4 UK. That did not happen in Canada. And it still hasn't happened. So as much as I'm like, yeah, we've come a long way, on another hand, it's like, and it's different in every country. I think Canada, of course, we are well respected. We are a strong country, both in terms of our performance, winter and summer, which is also a rarity. Canada brings it on both sides. And, we're very well respected in terms of having found the founding of the World Anti-Doping Agency happened, of course, in Canada. The headquarters are here in Montreal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, on the Paralympic side, there's so much more to do. And so much more to go. And that's not a criticism. It's just the more I stay involved, yes, on one hand, I see the evolution of Paralympic sport internationally, but I see how sometimes Canada is lagging behind.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like, as an athlete, for me, we see the progress, like where we were in Rio in 2016 to where we got to in Paris 2024. It is leaps and bounds ahead. And even watching Vancouver, being a kid from Vancouver and seeing very little to no coverage of the games even then was frustrating, and it was very difficult because I wanted to see the Paralympic, I wanted to see the ice hockey, I wanted to see the curling, and there wasn't that much there. But now, just to see the progress and seeing people like you and so many others take steps to fight and bring the coverage, bring the personalities to the media and bring to the forefront, because that's the one thing about parasport is we have these amazing personalities and these amazing people who are not just athletes, but just incredible leaders in their communities, and just more and more ways that we can bring that to the forefront is really going to just help tell stories and help so many other people's. But there's something that people may not know about you as well. You hold a master's degree from the University of Oxford. What was it like going to that school?
Oh my gosh, Nathan. It's really interesting because my ski career was divided in two. I actually had two skiing careers. I had my first skiing career on the national team, then I had a huge crash in I always get this wrong because I had a concussion and I'm bad with numbers now. I think it was, wait a minute. Oh, I don't even remember. But anyway, 2000, I'm aging myself here. I think it was, 2003. And as it happens, because as an athlete, you think in 4-year cycles and quadrennial cycles. So my whole life was in quadrennial cycles. And especially as I explained with skiing, it's not just this kind of show up and become a world champion kind of thing. You've got to be committed and you've got to be in the system for a while. So I competed in the Nagano Paralympics 1998, Salt Lake City 2002, and then in 2003, I had a huge crash in downhill, which is the fastest of the alpine disciplines, well over 100 kilometers an hour. And I looked probably much like I do now, but I got a huge concussion. And it was a career-ending concussion. Anyway, but after Salt Lake, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Did I want to keep skiing? Did I want to commit for another 4 years? So I had applied to grad school, including Oxford. And then after a while, after the concussion symptoms abated, I went and checked my email, and I'd been accepted to Oxford the very same day that I got the concussion. So I was like, oh, maybe this is a sign. So I went to Oxford, and it was really interesting too. And I did that, and it was a wonderful experience. It was hugely challenging because I realize now I had post-concussion syndrome. So I was doing my master's degree at Oxford while completely concussed, which explains why I didn't do that well on my final exam, because I couldn't remember things. But I guess my claim to fame is that I still managed, and this is no disrespect to Oxford at all, I still managed to get my master's degree with a concussion. I don't recommend it. It was really difficult, but the experience of going to Oxford was wonderful, life-changing in a totally different way than the Paralympics, and it was really, really good to have this diverse experience. And as I guess a leader now in Paralympic sport, whenever I talk to athletes like Nathan and others, I'm always curious and encouraging them to diversify their lived experience. I think it's really important.
Well, I'm sure too, as athletes get older and you have to look at your post-sporting career, it becomes more and more important. The one positive thing is the fact that people are actually starting to talk about it. They're starting to plan, and there are more programs that are being put into place to support those athletes. As we kind of wrap up the conversation, Karolina, there was one thing you mentioned early on. I want to pick your brain a bit on it, and it was the fact that when the season was ongoing for you as a skier, you're going all over the world. You're going to these different locations, whether it's at home, abroad. You talked about being on the mountains, being on the glaciers. Was there a specific style or location or type of snow that you really preferred when it came to training and performing?
So I cut you off.
Yeah.
So I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Calgary, which is at the foot of the Canadian Rockies. And I've skied all over the world. There is no doubt, it's where I learned to ski. There is no better snow in the world than Rockies snow, whether that's Canadian or Colorado. Rockies snow, I know, Nathan, you're from the West Coast, but that's wet and heavy and slushy, and it's like wet cement. It's terrible. So when we had to race in Whistler, I was like, no! The best snow in the world is in the Rockies, and then in the interior of BC. So between Vancouver and Calgary, where there's that interior bit, like the Okanagan and all that, best snow in the world. You cannot, the champagne powder, and that's not what racers like. But it's a beautiful snow. It's not ideal for racing, but if you can pack that down, it's awesome. Of course, racers like icy. So you get a lot of very skilled skiers coming out of Quebec and sometimes Ontario. So I, of course, like icy too, but I like just a smidgen of give, which most racers don't. But it's also to do with my disability and the strength or lack of strength. So just that tiny bit of git. So, that's my favorite snow. But my favorite place to ski is the Alps. It's just, there's nothing, they're so spectacular visually, and there's such a mountain culture that's inculcated, that's there, that's present. People live there, and they know, and they love ski racing in a way that you just don't see in other places. So you're really, people love, maybe not you personally, but they love your sport and they understand your sport. But I do remember, for instance, being at the World Championships in Switzerland in 2000, and I speak French, and it was in the French part of Switzerland, and I get to the finish line, and there were these host families, and then they realize I speak French, and they start talking to me, and they ask me about the team, and I'm a chocoholic, and I was like, yeah, the whole team, we really love chocolate. So the next day, they showed up with all the chocolate for the team. And, the whole team was like, oh, gee, was this Karolina's team? I mean, we all did eat the chocolate, and we were very happy. And it was many, many years ago. But just to show, local people do get interested. And Nathan mentioned the 2010 Paralympics, and I'm so sad to hear that, even as a local kid with a disability, he didn't have as much exposure, because it did feel like in Vancouver there was local exposure, but it still wasn't at the level that I would have liked to see.
Well, Karolina, you are doing a lot to continue to push the movement forward and get more of that exposure. We love having you on the show, educating us all about your sport and, the evolution of media when it comes to the Paralympics. So obviously we'll catch up with you down the road. Thank you so much again for taking the time.
Oh, thank you. Third time will be the charm, and I hopefully will not look so injured anymore.
That was Karolina Wisniewska, former Paralympian and co-chef de mission for the Paris Paralympics. Nathan, I just always love chatting with Karolina. You're going to have a great conversation. You're going to have fun talking with her. But I also learned so much when it comes to the sport of para-alpine. I always had a different viewpoint of, this year being so make or break for a lot of athletes. But, as she said, if you're consistent, if you're putting up similar numbers, similar stats, you're probably pretty confident where you're going to end up and whether or not you're going to make the cut or not.
Oh, yeah. It's one of those sports where, first off, she is just the best. Karolina's always bring that smile, always bring that energy. And even I've heard so many stories of para-alpine athletes being on that teetering point of even knowing if they are going to a games or not 2-3 weeks out of it. But at least for her, sharing that consistency is so important, but also like shining on her personality too, talking about that chocolate story because she's such an outgoing person. And of course, Karolina is going to be getting chocolates for the whole team, but it was just very special getting those little insights and just hearing about another side of sport and just how rigorous, how difficult a lot of what would be considered the off season actually is, because that's crucial points leading into such a short calendar in such a short time to compete and race.
Yeah, you literally have the month of May off and then the rest of your year is booked. I'm curious for you in cycling, do you have any time off? Do you get a full month, or is it kind of you're finding time throughout the year?
Usually we do get about a month off. But with a sport like cycling, I'm very lucky, and probably skiing is the same way, where if you can find somewhere to ride or you can find somewhere to ski that is not going to be taxing on the body, you're going to get out, you're going to do it as much as you can. But usually you take some time just more to let the body heal, the body rest, just because of the toll that it takes. Like, I can't imagine ripping down a hill at over 100 kilometers an hour and just the wear and tear on all aspects of your body, whether you're in the sitting class just on your shoulders or on your upper body, or if you're in the standing class or visually impaired class, just that toll that it takes on the lower limbs. It is just impressive. But you usually try to find a little bit of time just to relax, just so you're more mentally set and ready to go for the long, arduous march ahead.
Well, the conversation around para-alpine continues because Canada has been racking up some finishes in the world of para-alpine. Nathan, take it away with the PSN update.
Now, the PSN update.
Canada's Speed Demons of the Snow returned to action as the first Para-Alpine World Cup of 2025 hit the northern Italian Alps. Michaela Gosling claimed her first World Cup victory to only back it up with her second win, while Kurt Utwe stays perfect as he's 100% on podium appearances this season with his 7th appearance after winning a gold and silver in the men's sitting. Kali Eriksson in his sophomore season picked up a double bronze, and Alexis Guimond returned to the podium with a bronze. Switching from the Alps to the Rockies, we go to Colorado as the Winter Park Open hit the slopes. The Mile High Town saw para-alpine action as Canada's development team aimed to reach new heights. Notable performances saw Tokyo Paralympian Andrea Nelson win the giant slalom and Logan Leach take the crown in his category. Spencer Allen and Samuel Peters claimed podium places for the men, and Jessica McPhee and Florence Carrier took home hardware in the GS. With more races to come, check back next week to hear how Canada fared. And that's the PSN update.
Again, another update, another slew of top finishes for Canada. When it comes to skiing, and whether it's alpine or whether it's Nordic, the teams are in top form, Nathan.
Oh, it's phenomenal. Like, this is what you want a year out in that penultimate season, just having that kind of form and that kind of culture where it's a culture of success. And you've seen it from McKeever. You've seen it from Mark Arendz on the cross-country side of things, and even going into skiing with, like, we just had Karolina Wisniewska on, and just hearing about all the work that's being done and all the success that has happened. It is really amazing. But also there's still, as we talk about, there's still a long way to go in a year. So it's about realizing where you are in the present and just trying to get better every single day. But to see where Canada's at right now is really, really exciting.
Well, there may be a long time to go until the games, but this is the end of our time here for today's episode, so be sure to tune in next time. Catch you then.
Thanks for tuning in to Parasport Nation. Like and subscribe to the channel to follow us now.